So we move from perhaps the greatest speech in British history or English history, Elizabeth I at Tilbury. We went to the most ungrateful speech from that git de Gaulle after he saved his arse at Paris. And now we move on to perhaps the most politely menacing speech in human history. It's by Sir Arthur Harris. And just to give the background, this is February 42. He's just been made Commander-in-Chief of Bomber Command. He knows that the Germans have killed over 10,000 British people in the Blitz. They've decimated towns like Warsaw and Rotterdam and goodness knows how many others. But he also knows that at the moment we can't really strike back because we can't find any damn targets. The Germans already had radar navigation aids. We did not. Churchill, in one of his many ridiculous sayings, said, "Oh, the Germans follow the beam as they blindly follow their Führer," in relation to their radar navigation aids. Preposterous, yeah. You know, Kampfgruppe 100, that's how it could find the targets with a radar navigation beam. That's how they are able to melt Coventry. But anyway, let's get down to the speech. So he's taken over and he wants to set it out. And this is not his policy. You must remember that. After we realised we couldn't hit targets following the Butt reports in August of 41, come September, there's already a directive. And the directive is this: attack cities to make them uninhabitable and make everybody dwelling in them in fear of death. The idea being that all the industrial workers will run away to the country. That was the policy set down, and that was what he intended to do. And Arthur Harris is a tough man, by the way. In World War One, he was attacking Zeppelins and stuff over London. He was an excellent pilot. We get to the speech. Okay, this transcript may not be perfect, but I'll do my best. It's Sir Arthur Harris. The Nazis entered this war under the childish illusion that they were going to bomb everybody else, and nobody was going to bomb them. At Rotterdam, London, Warsaw, and half a hundred other places, they put their Hun Fury into operation. And this is the Bible quotation, Hosea 8, verse 7. He's quoting here, it was God speaking to the Israelites, you make an idol out of wood, well, you get chopped up by the splinters, and it's other variations on that theme. They sowed the wind, and now they are going to reap the whirlwind. Cologne, Lubeck, Rostock. They were only just the beginning. We cannot send 1,000 bombers a time over Germany every time as yet, but the time will come when we can do so. So they did do 1,000 bomber raid in May of 42, but they had to scrape up every single operational training unit and anything that could fly basically to get those 1,000 bombers in the air. And the problem is the average raid took between 5 and 10% attrition. And if you send 1,000 bombers and you lose 10%, that's 100 airplanes, 7 men per crew. So, he's right in saying we can't do this all the time. We continue. Let the Nazis take good note of the western horizon. There they will see a cloud as yet no bigger than a man's hand. But behind that cloud lies a whole massive power of the United States of America. We built our own bombers in the war in terms of bomber command. Lancasters and Halifaxes primarily, and Mosquitoes being Pathfinders. The 8th Air Force, when it did come over, all in all, apparently, and I was surprised to hear this, but it came from the horse's mouth, Arthur Harris, they actually dropped a tad more tonnage than we did over Germany throughout the course of the war. It was about equal, and it was a horrendous amount, but about equal. So he's right in saying, you've got to fear the USA, because they're in the war now. December 7th, 1941 has been and gone. When the storm bursts over Germany, they will look back to the days of Lubeck and Rostock and Cologne, as a man caught in the blast of a hurricane will look back to the gentle zephyrs of last summer. So he's saying, now you've been hit by the hurricane, you think what's happened at the moment is as bad? No, this was nice. This was a warm summer breeze. Beautiful use of language, polite but menacing. It may take a year, it may take 2, but for the Nazis, the writing is on the wall. Let them look out for themselves. the cure is in their own hands. There are a lot of people who say that bombing can never win a war. Well, my answer to that is that it has never been tried yet, and we shall see. It didn't win the war in Europe, but if the Germans had held out another 6 months, it would have done, because they'd have got the atomic bomb instead of the Japs. So and it did win the war in Japan, the atomic bomb. So everyone says, oh, strategic bombing didn't do a lot. It did a hell of a lot, and it in fact won the war in Japan, in the Pacific. But some people are a bit ignorant. they think because a bomb is exceptionally powerful, it's not a bomb. It's obviously something else. No, it was part of the strategic bombing offensive, and there would have been more to come. And on the subject of that, people trying to say, oh, it was a terrible, moral, inhumane thing to do. No, it saved probably a million Japanese lives dropping the atomic bombs, because there was no hint of surrender in the Japanese high command. Absolutely none. Indeed, even after Hirohito had it was deadlocked. The cabinet was deadlocked. He was not meant to speak. He was ceremonial. He, for once, broke the rule, and he said, no, this has to stop after the 6th and 9th of August. Made the decision. He was that little balancer to go on the side of surrender. But then there was a coup amongst junior army officers. They tried to arrest Hirohito, their god emperor, for being some kind of traitor or, surrender monkey or something. There was no hint of surrender. The atomic bombings were crucial, and had the Americans begun the invasion, the British obviously would as well. We had a hell of a lot of men assembled nearby as well from our Southeast Asia campaign. There was Tiger Force readying itself, bombers. It would have been an absolute apocalypse. So, anyone who comes up with this nonsense that they shouldn't have been dropped, would you rather that Japan was razed to the ground and there are no more Japanese in the world? We wouldn't have Nintendo if that had happened. Couldn't drive a Toyota. Anyway, I'm digressing massively from the speech, so let's get back to it. Anyway, so Arthur Harris is here saying about winning, bombing is, people say bombing can't win a war. Well, it's never been tried before, so we're going to see. He says now, Germany clinging more and more desperately to a widespread conquest, and even seeking foolishly for more, will make a most interesting initial experiment. Japan will provide the confirmation. So he's basically saying that they say that bombing can't win a war. Well, we'll experiment on the Germans. When we win that, we'll do the same to Japan, and that will confirm it. In fact, bombing didn't win the war against Germany, although it did greatly contribute to it. And then Japan, that war was ultimately won by bombing, even though it would have been won by other means had it not been for the atomic bombs. The time is not yet, he says. There is a great deal of work to be done first, and let us all get down to it. And that is the end. So, a polite but menacing speech, quoting the Bible, very self-assured. He's absolutely certain that bombing is going to win this campaign. It's going to win the war. And indeed, when we look at it, and look, I'm influenced here because I've listened to Arthur Harris for the last 2 hours, talking about his memoirs and everything else. And so maybe I'm somewhat, in the mood of, on his side at the moment, and maybe my views will change. But I've read about this for years. So my view is, I've read Albert Speer's book, Inside the Third Reich, as well. According to Speer, if it wasn't for the strategic bombing campaign, their output of particularly things like tanks, anti-tank armaments, ammunition, all these things, they would have just been, they'd had the same freedom that America did to just produce and produce and produce. Germany would have been able to do that. Probably 1.5 million fit, able-bodied people were manning the aircraft defences of Germany. There were, I think, over 1 million Flak 88s. I may have that figure totally wrong, but I know there were a hell of a lot of Flak 88s, which was obviously the best German gun for taking out tanks, that were being kept in Germany. So not only was the production of them being stopped, but also they were being occupied, they had to be kept in Germany, whereas they could have been blasting our tanks. And as we all know, one flak ATA will take out 10 Shermans and even T-34s with impunity. So all these air defences were being kept back. And just imagine, this was the thing with bombing, right? If you drop a bomb on a railway track, you can repair that within a few hours, and the Germans did. This was the argument for bombing Auschwitz, to try and stop the transportation of Jews and other prisoners there, and their onward movement, and so on. Just bomb the railway, and then they can't transfer prisoners in and out. You've greatly hampered their extermination of what they consider racially undesirable people. The problem was, the reason why the Chief of Staff said, no, we can't, is because, yes, we might have well hit them. Firstly, we'd have killed many people in the camps, but secondly, the railways would have been repaired immediately. They're just very, very easy to repair. You just chuck down some ballast, chuck in a few sleepers, stick a bit of metal where it's not like, I'm digressing again, but it's not like in the Confederacy in the American Civil War, they had no means to make railway track. They had no foundries to make them, hence why you had Sherman's neckties, where they would just heat up big bits of railway track, bend them around trees, and these things littered the Confederacy after Sherman's March to the Sea and stuff through Georgia. Germany, they would just repair them in an instant. But what you cannot repair is the infrastructure of cities. So when you drop bombs on a city and you smash up the sewerage network, you smash up the plumbing, you smash up the electricity grid, it takes, and this is something Arthur Harris said, the number of tradesmen, all these tradesmen that could be doing far more useful work at the front, because believe me, you need a lot of tradesmen repairing tanks and things like that. They break down all the time. They were all being drawn to the cities to repair stuff because everything kept getting smashed up. And this is what we discovered at Coventry, that, you might be able to, get the rubble out the road quickly, but repairing all the infrastructure, it takes ages. And so the strategic bombing offensive was the greatest success, I guess you would say, of the Second World War. Far more successful than land campaigns, really. Bearing in mind we were booted out of France and then they surrendered like well, we've talked about that. I won't insult the French again. But I like the speech. If you listen to it, Google it. It's on Pathé News. It's polite, very British, but very menacing. And it was a prophecy, really, of what would happen if Germany continued to resist. The tragedy is that it cost most civilians in Germany were Nazis. Hitler did not jump to power, with a coup. No, he was voted into power and then did a little bit of a sneakiness to kind of get to be the Chancellor. Okay, but he had the largest party, but not the majority in the election of early 1933. But most civilians were very much, behind him. But, of course, there are many who were not. And I don't think I mentioned it. I'm not advocating the bombing of cities or anything like that. I'm just talking about history here and how the commanders-in-chief in the countries felt. If Krabbis the Crab if her great-grandmother had left it a week later before fleeing Gleiwitz, there'd be no Krabbis the Crab, because she went through Dresden a few days before the bombing, whereupon the street, the station and so on, where she stayed for the night, burnt to the ground and everyone was asphyxiated if they were in bomb shelters. So I'm not advocating any, I'm not taking sides. I'm just telling the history. So there we go. I've waffled on long enough. Bye-bye.